Hello and welcome back. Today is a little different as we focus on just one case, and this case really is unimaginable. Our focus today is Sarah Barrass. Born in 1984, she grew up in Sheffield, and we're going to look at her upbringing before we get into her crimes. Her upbringing was actually very tough. She was one of 5 children. Her and her siblings all had different fathers, and reports suggest that actually not one of the 5 dads had much of a relationship with any of their children. The 5 siblings, half-brothers and sisters, lived a very disorderly life. There were no boundaries. When they were hungry, they took food. School was a choice. If they didn't want to go, then they didn't. They were left to do whatever they wanted to. Sarah's mum had boyfriends who frequented the house as well as lots of other friends. There were strangers coming and going as they pleased, using substances in front of the children. It was not just neglect, but there are also allegations of SA towards the children, Sarah being one of those. Because of this, Sarah and her 4 siblings were removed from the home by social services. Unfortunately, a lot like their out-of-cycle upbringing, they also filtered through the care system with no real stability, until Sarah was returned to her mother around the age of 9 or 10. Her eldest half-brother, who was 13 at the time, Brandon Machen, was already living with their mum after also spending some time dotting around the care system. Brandon was a mischief maker with a wicked temper. He would start fights in the home and at school. Sarah was reserved and self-contained, but the 2 siblings formed a close bond. She looked up to her older brother and they spent lots of time with each other. And I can't help but think this relationship probably was a piece of stability they were never afforded growing up. With the relationship between Sarah and Brandon developing and then becoming more close, Sarah began to change. The shy and mousy girl also turned into a bully like Brandon. She started to attack other children, but also watched her brother Brandon do the same thing. The worst bullying the pair would do was on their younger siblings. Sarah, who would once dote after them, now watched and laughed. They also went on to inflict harm on animals, local wildlife, and the family pets. They formed a connection over liking gruesome content as well as doing these gruesome things. The other siblings have described them both as cruel and as psychopaths. As we walk through this case together, we will start to see how decisive this connection with her elder half-brother Brandon really was. The children were removed and placed back into her mother's care multiple times. At the age of 14, Sarah returned home to her mother's, and it was at this point she decided to tell the police of the SA that she experienced. The police worked with her and a person was found guilty of R and sentenced to prison. Brandon at the time was still close to her and very supportive of her, but their relationship took a turn in a dark direction. 18-year-old Brandon would send his sister Sarah love letters, not the normal platonic sibling love, but passionate letters. Their mum actually found these notes and contacted the social services herself, but nothing was ever addressed or done about the relationship. They were siblings. Sarah was 14 and Brandon was 18 years old. There was no intervention. There was no movement or concern from the authorities, which is shocking. With nothing being done, the relationship continued. By the time Sarah was 16, the relationship began to be intimate, and at 19 years old, Sarah became pregnant. She had a baby boy named Blake. They decided that no one is to know of the father. I'm assuming as it's disgusting and embarrassing, but also illegal. When Blake was born, of course, there were questions. She simply said the father was a deadbeat and wanted nothing to do with him. The pair realised they couldn't live together because it would look suspicious, so Brandon moved into a property just down the road, far enough away not to create questions but close enough to help raise Blake and be a partner to Sarah. The questions did still come from their own family because of the mother finding the notes and the close connection they've always had, but they were just questions. No one really inquired or took action. Living in their secret little world, she then falls pregnant again and has her second son, Tristan. The hospital, family, friends ask, and again his dad wanted no involvement. She went on to have 2 more sons, and it was the same story each time. She said that it was the same dad who fathered all 4 sons, and he wanted nothing to do with them. And well, no one ever questioned or inquired about it. So, to the outside world, she was a single mum running the household on Greg House Road in Sheffield, which was an urban area but close to the schools. From most accounts, she was a great mum. There was a level of respect, a single mum on her own doing it all herself, although she did have some help from family, and I'm sure you have guessed. Her half-brother, Brandon. Only down the road from her, he would help with her everyday tasks, pop in most days. He was a father figure to the children. The sick reality that he was actually the father. Naturally, as the boys got older, they started to question who their dad was. What was he like? Why don't they see him? They were told their dad was a war hero from World War II. And clearly, to you and I, this is not true, just because of the timeline. But they're children, and the person you trust most is your mother, so they took that for the truth. As well as asking questions, as the children started to grow, they developed special needs, and they were sent to a specialist for help. It's reported now that it's suspected this is because of their parents' relationship, but obviously at the time no one knew this and it wasn't suspected. I just want to say as well, with the developmental issues that all 4 boys had, Sarah didn't take them to specialists. She was on top of that and was very honest with authorities and within the school and wanted them to get the help that they needed. The daily life of the children was normal to them. Their father had passed away a war hero, so their uncle Brandon was the father figure they needed. He went around every day and really took them under his wing. Both Sarah and Brandon were unemployed, so their focus was the upbringing of their children. But when it got to special needs of the 4 boys, it was actually Brandon who attended most of the meetings or procedures to support the children. And like I said before, a running theme, this was never questioned. Although the family and friends, even those in the local area, thought it was a bit bizarre that an uncle would be going to these kind of meetings, the authorities never questioned it. So I guess they all thought, well, what could we do? Blake and Tristan had a really hard time at school. They were severely bullied and they didn't really make any friends. They only had each other. And there's reports to suggest that their home life wasn't so great either. Sarah and Brandon's younger brother, Martin, went to Sarah's house to see his nephews. And of course, Brandon was also there. While Martin was there, Brandon was highly aggressive towards the boys. Martin took this information and reported it to social services. And you guessed it, you won't be shocked, nothing was done with this report. Half-siblings Brandon and Sarah decided they wanted another child. It's assumed that they wanted a girl. They went on to have 2 more boys, making the total to 6 children. And it was the same story with these 2 boys. Their father wanted nothing to do with them. Now, it shouldn't have taken 6 kids, but family and friends and locals at this point really start to question, where is the father? Does he even exist? And sure, maybe, like her mother, history repeating itself with the lack of support from the fathers, but all 5 dads of the children were known, they were named people. We obviously don't know, but I wonder if anyone really did question her on who the father was or tried to kind of investigate and see. And I'm not saying that family, friends, people in the local area should have made the assumption that it was Sarah and Brandon, because I think that conclusion is so far stretched, as no one would believe half brother and sister would have children together. But it kind of went unnoticed. And she actually even had social services come to her house. They didn't question it, and by all accounts, social services said the home was happy and she was a very good mother. Things really started to change in the household when Tristan and Blake got older and they transitioned to secondary school. At first, it was apparently fine. They got into secondary school and were settled. They still had a difficult time. They were bullied, but they did have friends. It's reported that Blake loved football. And Tristan was very funny. He'd always make his friends and classmates laugh. But unfortunately, this changed. As Blake and Tristan made their way through secondary school education, their behaviour got worse and worse. It started off with them fighting back the bullies, but then began to be an overbearing personality of both boys being highly aggressive. Social services actually got involved and visited their home to help support Sarah with Tristan and Blake's behaviour. It was found that Brandon and Blake had access to not child-friendly images and videos on the internet, and they viewed this content whenever they could, even at school. Social services told Sarah to simply keep a closer eye, and she responded by turning off the internet at home. The school supported this by not letting them access PCs or other devices while there. Not only was the aggression in school, but they started to be aggressive at home, increasingly being more nasty to their younger siblings. It actually got to a point that Tristan carried a weapon into school, and Sarah believed he was a harm to himself or to others. Sarah phoned social services and said how Tristan really suffered with his mental health, and wanted them to assess him in regards to this. She also told social services of other concerns, like the two eldest boys peeping on their younger siblings when they were in the shower, or telling them to sit on their laps. She also told them that Tristan and Blake were even inappropriate to each other, and she reported this all to social services. Social services put a care plan in place, and Sarah was told just to make sure Blake and Tristan were never left alone with the 4 younger children. She worked with authorities and the school. At one point, their behaviour spiralled so much at home she actually phoned the police for help, but to no avail. She was left with just a care plan. But this also sent Sarah into a spiral. She was contacting the authorities and being a good mother, trying to get the boys help, but the sick reality is if the authorities found out the real nature of her and Brandon's sick secret life, the children would definitely be taken and put into care. This build-up of fear, guilt and paranoia continued in Sarah. By 2019, it got really bad. There had been no change in the behaviour of the boys, and a child's parent from the school reported and made allegations that Tristan, Sarah's son, had essayed their child. This was taken very seriously, of course. Social services really needed to know family members, friends, their daily routine. But because of the boy's actions, they also believed it was a telltale that maybe he had seen this behaviour or it had happened to him. They asked who Tristan's father was and how they were to contact him, and then began to realise, well, who is any of the children's father? Social services really needed to know Tristan's family, friends, his day-to-day life, because a child doesn't just wake up and do this sort of thing. It's normally a telltale sign that a child has been through this or has seen things at home. They wanted to know everyone and everything that Tristan had been exposed to, but she wouldn't give them the answers. I'm sure it maybe crossed their mind too. Will she not tell us who the father is because he had done this to Tristan? She had always worked alongside the authorities, social services, the school very well, being very honest, asking them for support and always reporting any issues. And suddenly, when questioned about Tristan's dad, she became very shut off and very evasive, which made the social services very suspicious. They kept questioning Sarah, but she would not budge, so it was left. Social services told her that they would be in touch soon. They changed the status of Tristan to a child in protection, which means that social services were going to highly monitor him. This really rattled Sarah. She knew that they may uncover their secret, and she began relentlessly texting her brother, who was also her boyfriend. I'd rather take my own life and theirs than them go into care. I gave them life and I can take it away. In that state of panic, she then began posting on social media. I'm not mean or cold-hearted. I'm just sick of being done over. She also sent a text to a friend. I love my kids. Too much to take their lives. I have thought of every solution, putting them all into care, checking them into the local nut house, or taking all their lives on my own. The texts to her friends and the social media posts were never reported to the police, and I really can't understand why. If someone was talking like this and making threats, and you know the situation involving the children and what was going on, you would see this as a massive concern, and as we soon find out, unfortunately, it should have been. On the 23rd of May 2019, Sarah and Brandon, both panicked and texting each other, decided that the best solution was taking the lives of the 6 children, and then no one would find out their secret. Sarah went to the pharmacy and picked up her children's medication for ADHD. It's reported at least 4 had this medication, so this was a lot. Later in the evening, she texted family and friends saying all 6 children were very unwell. It was a tummy bug and they wouldn't be going to school the next day. The whole household was very sick. That night they took the ADHD medication and forced the 4 older children to take as many tablets as possible. Even though they text that the solution was to take the lives of all 6 children, it seems like they didn't attempt to harm the 2 younger boys. Afterwards, the 4 boys were sent upstairs to get some sleep. The next day, on Friday the 24th, Sarah, hoping her plan had worked, was surprised that all 4 boys were still alive, but they were sick with dizziness and headaches. Blake and Tristan woke early and played a game on their Nintendo Switch. They realised they felt far too unwell to actually attend school. She sent Brandon a text saying, "The plan hasn't worked, they are still alive." Brandon then arrived at the household and they started to Google the best ways to take someone's life. After this, they went into Blake and Tristan's room. Sarah and Brandon went into Tristan and Blake's room. Sarah took Tristan's life, and in the same manner, Brandon took Blake's. They left the boys in their room and then attempted to take the life of the 3rd eldest, who was their 12-year-old son, but this failed and caused panic. Sarah realised that she wouldn't be able to take the lives of the 4 other children, and she shut herself in a room with them. She starts making notes on her phone that Brandon is the dad to all her children. The pills didn't work, so he had me take the life of Tristan, and he took the life of Blake. I'm sat here with the others. He's going to take their lives and mine. I'm just so scared. If by some miracle my kids live, look after them and make sure they know I love them. After the failed attempt, in that moment Sarah started devising a plan. She realised that she was going to blame all of this on Brandon, her half-brother, and he forced her to take the life of Tristan. While locked in the room with the other surviving 4 sons, she sent texts to friends which alarmed them enough to call the police. At around 8 a.m. in the morning, the police entered the house. This sent the local area into chaos. Primary schools were shut down. There were ambulances and numerous police cars surrounding the house, with a helicopter also dispatched. When the police entered, Brandon was sat on the sofa drinking a Monster, like nothing has even happened, and Sarah was found with the 4 other children. The police see that there are only 4 children and ask Sarah where the other 2 are. Sarah responded by saying that they're at a friend's house, but one of the siblings in the room told the police officers that they had their lives taken and pointed at the bedroom next door. Sarah told the child to stop, but the other policeman had already discovered the boys. They were still alive and were rushed to hospital, but they passed away when arriving. Sarah and Brandon were arrested and the 4 other children were taken to a nearby hospital. The 2 youngest sons were unharmed, but the other 2 were in a bad way, not only from the event, but because of the tablets they were forced to take the night before. Thankfully, both boys survived. At the police station, Sarah was very stoic and handed the interviewing officer a notebook with funeral arrangement for the boys. No question on how her other sons are, just that. It's in this interview that she tells the officer that Brandon, her half-brother, is the father to all her children, and social services were going to find out this secret. She then says how Brandon persuaded her and forced her to take the child's lives to keep their secret safe. She tells them that they were given ADHD medication and taken the lives of Tristan and Blake, as well as the failed attempt of the third eldest child, but keeps saying she was forced to do this by Brandon. She also tells the officer that Brandon's original plan was to take the lives of all 6 children, and then she would take her own life. She said that she would rather they all didn't exist than them be placed in care. On the other hand, Brandon made a full confession that they had both planned to take the lives of the children together. He said that his reasoning was the allegations of SA against Tristan made him so angry he wanted to rip their heads off. The police looked into Brandon and Sarah's digital footprints. It was clear to the police that Sarah was not forced because of the texts that her and Brandon sent to each other and the Google searches. Sarah too ended up making a full confession and changing her story so she could take a plea deal. They both pled guilty to 2 counts of taking their sons' lives and 6 of conspiracy. They were both found guilty and given a minimum of 35 years in prison. After the sentencing, social services performed a serious case review. The report was published and found that the crimes could not have been predicted. The house was demolished in 2021 and instead a memorial to Blake and Tristan will be placed there. And that concludes our case today. Although the review report found that the crime couldn't be predicted, I think it's fair to say that authorities really did miss opportunities to help the children. Even when Sarah was honest with social services, a care plan was the only thing put in place, even though the boy's behaviour was continuing to get worse. And the boy's behaviour isn't something that a child just does. The allegation against Tristan, I can't even imagine what was going on at home. The situation was already very messed up. I just hope that the 4 remaining children are safe and getting all the support that they need. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time.